Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Church, where our mission is to explore the eternal, nurture community, and pursue the common good. No matter who you have been, who you are, or who you are becoming, we greet you today with love. And now I'd like to invite birthday girl Ingrid Young up to light our chalice this morning.
Good morning. We light this chalice as a symbol of our sacred time together. The burning chalice represents the light of reason and science, the warmth of loving community, the cleansing heat of justice, and the flame of hope. And I am very happy to be with everyone here on my birthday. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. We welcome you this morning with these words by Reverend Elizabeth Mount. Come into this place, bringing all you hold with you, though your heart be heavily burdened. Whether you be on the brink of tears or burn with unquenchable rage, this community can hold you and your strongest emotions. Yes, even the messy ones are welcome here. Come into this place with every piece of yourself gathered up, and let us be the church incarnate. Let us bring forth the spirit of all that we love by the words of our mouths and the doing of our hands as we make sacred this time together. Our opening hymn is Abide With Me, performed by Leah Morris.
Abide with me, fast falls the eventide, the darkness deepens, still with me abide, when other helpers fail and comforts flee. Help of the helpless, oh, abide with me. Swift to its close, ebbs out life's little day. Earth's joys grow dim, its glories pass away. Change and decay in all around I see. O thou who changes not, abide with me. We need each other every passing hour, channels of grace and life affirming power, faithful companions share this path with me. Through all our fears and hopes, abide with me.
So our story today comes from the book Ancient Stories for Modern Times, as retold by Faye Mogensen. Our story title is A Pig's Life, and it comes to us from southern India. Once there was a guru who had meditated for so long that he had developed the gift of seeing into the future. People from miles around flocked to see him. They all wanted to know what was in store for them. But the guru felt uneasy about sharing too much. Instead, he would only say, have faith, live a good life. To be honest, he felt that knowing the future only made life more difficult. In fact, his knowledge about what lay ahead for him made it challenging to have faith at times. The problem was that he knew his destiny was to become a pig in his next life. A pig? The guru had tried to live a good and pure life, and it puzzled him to no end why he would have such a strange and lowly destiny. He thought that perhaps in past lives he had accumulated a great deal of bad karma that he hadn't paid off yet. For a long time, he fussed and worried about the situation. And then, remembering that he was a guru, he went back to meditation. Well, one day, after a particularly long and deep session, he suddenly arrived at a perfect solution. He called for his most loyal disciple and to be certain asked, will you do anything I ask? The man replied, I am your disciple. I know that all you ask will be for the good. Of course, I will do it. Thank you, said the guru. He cleared his throat a little and added, first, you must know that I am destined to be a pig in my next life. Well, the disciple's jaw dropped. The guru was quick to explain that he was certain it must have to do with his past lives. But you can help me. Please, after I die, watch for my birth. As a pig, I will have the same birthmark on my forehead that I have now. The disciple nodded. Good, good. When you see me, you must kill me straight away. The disciple was aghast. He had never harmed anything. He wasn't sure he could do such a thing. But the guru reassured him. He explained his perfect plan. Pigs are unclean, so it's no sin to kill them. And the sooner I die as a pig, the sooner I will move on to my next life on a higher plane. The disciple trusted his guru. He shook away his hesitance and nodded in agreement. Yes, he could and would do as his guru asked. Well, not long afterward, the guru became ill and died. After the funeral, the disciple visited the neighboring farms every day. The barns were dirty and smelly. He pinched his nose and bravely avoided the mud pies so that he could check on the animals in their pens. Within a few weeks, one of the sows gave birth to 21 piglets. And sure enough, on close inspection, the disciple saw that one of them had a birthmark on its forehead, just like the guru's mark. The disciple reached hesitantly for the knife he had hidden in the folds of his robe. It was there. With some difficulty, he grabbed the squirming piglet. He held the fleshy animal close to his chest. It wriggled, trying to escape, but the disciple hung on tightly. He grimaced as he summoned the courage to bring the knife blade to the piglet's throat. But before he did, he heard a high-pitched squeak. It almost sounded like words were coming out of the piglet's mouth. The disciple listened more closely, and sure enough, the piglet was speaking. It was saying, "Stop! Don't kill me! As my loyal disciple, I command you not to kill me." The disciple was shocked. Should he obey the words of the piglet, or should he obey the words of the man? Well, before he could decide, the piglet continued, "I know that in my past life I told you to kill me, but that was before I knew what it was like to be a pig. The mud is soft and silky. My mother's belly is warm and comforting. Her milk flows freely and tastes as sweet as honey. A pig's life is a good life. I truly believe that it is a fair reward for my past life." Well, the disciple was more amazed than ever and more than a little relieved. He set his master down next to the sow. He watched for a moment as the piglet snuggled up with its mother. As he walked down to the river to wash off the filth from the barn, he shook his head thinking, How strange it is that you can know the future and yet not understand it at all. So I like this story, and we can glean a lot of different meanings from this wisdom tale from India. Well, today, I think the story shows that just because someone has changed since we last saw them, it doesn't mean that we need to reject them. They are still something of the same person, the same being, but they changed of some or all of who they are. It doesn't mean that we have to cut them out of our lives if we don't want to. We can learn to see them for who they are now and appreciate them for who they are now. And we can ask them about their new life and what they like about their new life and appreciate. Because we never know, we might never know that the mud is soft and silky if we never ask. Thank you. I'd now like to invite Deborah Shin up to introduce our offering.
Good morning. Every Sunday, we take an offering, and since 2002, all the cash and designated checks from that offering have gone directly to external nonprofit organizations doing good work. We call them our Change for Change partners. For the month of January, our Change for Change partner is Planned Parenthood Great Plains. Planned Parenthood Great Plains provides birth control, family medicine, STI testing and treatment, transgender care, information on pregnancy options, and other critical health services to individuals and families in Arkansas, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. You can make your gift by sending a check to First Unitarian. Just write Change for Change in the memo line. Or you can make an online payment through our website, oneuc.org.
To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And the time for every purpose under heaven. To everything. Time to kill, a time
1 year ago, on January 6th, a vicious assault was launched upon the seat of our government, our country's capital. While some of the attackers have been arrested and punished for their crimes, many of the most egregious offenders still walk free. The insurrection is still an open wound in our civic body, and many of us still bear the trauma of that day. Because of this, I thought it would be appropriate to hear once again the life-affirming words that were spoken at the inauguration. This is Youth Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman reading her poem, The Hill We Climb.
When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. In the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gaze not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promise to Glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the wind-swept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Wherever you are, however you are seated now, I invite you to get just a bit more comfortable and take a few deep breaths. Back in the beginning of the pandemic, when we were starting to meet virtually, I told a story about an invisible string that connects us even when we are apart. I invite you to hold your palm open and then close it. And imagine that in your hand, you are holding that invisible string that connects you to your community and to everyone you love. That string is just one filament in an enormous web. At each node in the web, there is a person you love who is holding in one hand the string that runs straight back to you. And in the other hand, they're holding the string that connects them to everyone else they love. Some of them are shared ancestors, and some are people you've never met, but who are connected to you through this beloved person. I invite you to take a moment to scan this web of love. Take in some of the faces of the dear ones who are holding on to the invisible string that is connected back to you. And take a deep breath. And now I invite you to focus on just one face. It should be a face of someone who is still in your heart, but is no longer present in your life. It might be someone who has died or moved away, or someone with whom you've lost touch. Let it not be a person whose memory brings up too much pain. We don't want to open up any trauma here. Instead, see if you can focus on a person whose absence brings up in you a gentle sadness, a soft aching, more than an acute pain. And if you're unable to think of a beloved person without bringing up too many difficult emotions, then maybe see if you can imagine a relatively neutral person who is no longer in your life, like a favorite waiter in a restaurant that's now closed. And again, the ache should be gentle and not severe. And if this exercise is too much, I invite you to just tune out my words for a minute and sit and breathe. So coming back to that face, holding that person in love and care, I invite you to let them fade back into the shimmering web. And let's take another breath. Now I invite you to give a little tug on that invisible string and see if you can't feel just the faintest tug back. The web still holds. Even though that one dear face may be gone from your life, the connection remains. The string of love is still there. Let's take one more deep breath. It's natural to have some tears well up at this point, but maybe see if it's not possible to smile at the same time. To hold loss and joy at the same time, knowing that the web of love is never broken. And remaining in a spirit of meditation, let's listen to this next song, Japanese Bowl by Peter Meyer, performed by Lana Henson and Warren Palmer last August 2020.
I'm like one of those Japanese bowls that were made long ago. I have some cracks in me. They have been filled with gold. That's what they used back then when they had a bowl to lend.
called Japanese Bowl.
Here's a story some of you have heard before, but I'll tell it again. It happened back in the spring of 2020, back when here in Oklahoma, we were in the safer at home stage of the pandemic. Those of us who could, who weren't working on the front lines, were hunkered down at home, hoarding toilet paper and sharing tips about where hand sanitizer or bleach could be found. We were diligently Cloroxing our grocery bags and waiting for it all to be over, because surely it would be over soon. It was in those early days of the pandemic that I experienced the most curious thing. An LED candle that had been sitting on the bathroom countertop gathering dust suddenly turned on in the middle of the night. In the morning, I tried to switch it off, but even with the switch in the off position, it glowed. I left it as it was, assuming it would go out as soon as the battery died, but it did not go out. Not for a week, not for 2 weeks. Now, I'm not an overly superstitious person, but I caught myself thinking, it's a COVID miracle. And this is embarrassing to admit, but I began to wonder if when the candle finally went out, the crisis would be over as well. For several more days, every morning I went in to brush my teeth, and there the candle would be glowing warmly. I came to see it as a tiny beacon of hope, until I got used to seeing it and stopped noticing it. And then one morning, I noticed it had gone out. But the pandemic wasn't over. It was barely getting started. By August 9th, we were almost 5 months into the pandemic, and I gave a sermon on ambiguous loss, surmising that this concept from psychology and social science could help to explain why so many of us were experiencing hopelessness, anxiety, anger, irritability, worry, confusion, indecisiveness, insomnia, and a general sense of emotional overwhelm. All these things are typical symptoms of ambiguous loss, which has been defined as, quote, a loss that remains unclear and without official verification or immediate resolution, which may never be achieved, unquote. Therapist, educator, and social scientist Dr. Pauline Boss coined the term ambiguous loss in the 1970s. At that time, she was working with 2 different groups of patients: wives of fighter pilots who went missing in action in Vietnam, and families in which work-driven fathers were emotionally distant and psychologically disconnected from their children. In the case of the wives of missing Vietnam veterans, they were living in a state of limbo, widowed, but not officially. Their husbands were gone, but they couldn't say exactly when, where, or how they had died. There was no body that had been returned to them in a flag-draped coffin. And because there was no moment of death, there was never a single moment when these women went from being wives to widows. Their husbands were just not there anymore. In some ways, the situation with the children of work-obsessed fathers was even more complicated. Their fathers were still physically present. They were still alive. Their children could see them and touch them. They were just not there to them. In both cases, Dr. Boss's patients were experiencing a kind of loss that doesn't fit neatly into the way that our society defines appropriate grief, because it's a grief without closure. The wives of Vietnam MIAs were still connected to their husbands, even though they were physically gone. In the case of the children of workaholic fathers, their loved one was physically present, but emotionally gone. How do you recover from a loss when the loss itself is indistinct? And that's a problem, because in our Western society, loss is seen as a kind of rend in the fabric of life that must be sewn up, or as a hole that must be closed. Closure is the goal. Seeing the corpse or coffin of a departed loved one will bring closure, we're told. Closure is what families of murder victims are supposed to experience when the person who killed their loved one is put behind bars. Closure is what is supposed to happen once the divorce is final. But there's a widely held belief in our society that grief must have an end, that a healthy person will eventually get over it. But as Pauline Boss declares in her book published just last month, The Myth of Closure, grief doesn't actually work that way. In fact, it's often others who want us to find closure when we're grieving. It's not necessarily something we want for ourselves. Back when I gave that first sermon on ambiguous loss in August 2020, the form of ambiguous loss that seemed most real and present was the type in which the beloved is physically missing. I think this should resonate with nearly all of us. Some of us have had loved ones die who we couldn't be with in their final moments because of COVID. Many of us have had loved ones pass away from various causes because the pandemic or during the pandemic, but we aren't yet able to think of them as dead because we never experienced the ritual of passing that is a funeral or a memorial service. Here in our church community, we have lost beloved members during the pandemic, yet it may be hard to think of them as truly gone because we simply aren't in the places where we would normally see them. Once we're back in those places and situations that we associate with those beloved ones, the realness of their absence may finally hit. And that will be a hard blow. And it's something we need to be preparing ourselves for, holding ourselves and others gently
in kindness and in care, knowing that it will hurt. The ambiguous loss of physical absence that so many of us have experienced isn't just related to death. During the pandemic, people retired, friends moved away, young people graduated and left home, and yet there was no chance for an in-person goodbye. We didn't get to see them in the process of leaving. They were there, and then they were gone. And we can't point to a single moment in time that marked their departure. And now, here we are. Now it's home tests and not toilet paper that are in short supply. And it seems we will be living with COVID for a long time. We are still living in a state of ambiguous loss. Yet the nature of that loss may be changing. Because while we were apart, we did not stop growing and changing as people. And as we are once again able to be physically present with others, we may find that they still aren't there. At least not in the way that we remember them. In some cases, the changes are heartbreaking. The isolation of the pandemic caused some of us to experience accelerated memory loss. For others, it provoked relapses in addiction or aggravated severe depression and other mental illness. Those who have experienced this directly may be mourning the loss of their former selves. And those who love and care for these individuals may be left with the terrible ambiguity of having their dear one still physically present, but psychologically or emotionally gone. In other cases, the changes may be happy, yet we may still experience them as ambiguous loss. During the pandemic, we have all learned new things. Many of us have developed new interests and hobbies and have lost interest in the things we once enjoyed. This is all for the good, and yet we can find ourselves missing our old friends the way they used to be. And that story that Tim told us, the guru may be happy in his new life as a pig, but those who loved him will still mourn his absence as their guru. As people have changed, the places they occupy have also changed. School, work, and church will never be exactly the same as they were in February 2020. In many ways, they will be better, more health conscious, more flexible, more multi-platform, allowing people to connect in person and virtually. But that doesn't mean we won't still grieve the loss of the old places as they were before. There are three ways we can deal with all this ambiguous loss. We can latch onto the past and be trapped in a delusion that we can bring back what is gone. We can buy into the myth of closure, insisting that the past is the past and it's time to just move on. Or we can learn to embrace ambiguity and live with ambiguous loss, with grace and resilience. Pauline Boss, lists several ways that we can survive and even thrive in the face of ambiguous loss. First, she suggests that we find meaning in the loss. What did we learn from it? How did we grow? Sometimes the only meaning we can find in ambiguous loss is that it is meaningless. In the case of the pandemic, so many thousands of lives have been lost that could have been saved if people had just been vaccinated. There was no meaning in those deaths. But we can find meaning in fighting against the forces that encouraged such willful ignorance. Second, we can learn to relinquish our desire for mastery over things we can't control. Third, we can live into our new identities. We aren't the same people we were in 2019, and we can mourn that loss, even as we find ways of embracing who we are now or who we are becoming. Fourth, we can learn to accept ambiguous feelings. It is entirely normal to feel both regret and anticipation, deep loss, and a sense of relief, anger, and affection, all at the same time. Fifth, we can revise our attachment to the people and things we have lost. We don't have to stop loving the people who are no longer with us to be able to love again. As Dr. Boss writes, quote, "We are, after all, an accumulation of all the relationships we have held over our lifetime. It is possible to hold them all, the old and the new, the good and the bad, in the same sphere, for they are all part of who we have become," unquote. And finally, we can find a new hope. The candle of hope that the pandemic would end and that life would quickly return to normal, well, that went out long ago. But we can light a new candle of a new hope. So many dear people and places and ways of being are now gone, but they can live on in our hearts. Even as we open our hearts to new people, new experiences, new joy. Nothing that is loved is truly lost. And all of it is sacred and beautiful and perfect, just as it is. Our closing hymn is Ordinary World. And this is a cover by Jen Dawson and Diane Rogelstad, and it comes to us courtesy of Foothills Unitarian Church.
Came in from a rainy Thursday on the avenue. Thought I heard you talking softly. I turned on the lights, the TV, and the passion or coincidence was prompted here to say, pride will tear us both apart. Now pride's gone out the window, across the rooftops, run away. Left me in the vacuum of my heart. What is happening to me? Crazy some say. Where is my friend when I need you most? Gone away, but I won't cry for yesterday. There's an ordinary world somehow I have to find. As I try to make my way to the ordinary world, I will learn to survive. Papers in the roadside tell of suffering and greed. Fear today, forgot tomorrow. Oh, here beside the news of holy war and holy need, ours is just a little sorrow talk. I don't cry for yesterday. There's an ordinary world somehow I have to find. And as I try to make my way to the ordinary world, I will learn to every word is my word. Every word is my word.
In case you didn't hear me say it earlier, I'm really happy to be with everyone who's here. And we extinguish this chalice, this flame, but not the light of love and community that burns in our hearts.
I leave you today with these words from Dr. Pauline Boss, quote, as you venture out into the world in a new way now, know that your bonds to those you lost can continue. No need to forget. No need for closure, unquote. As you go out into a new world, may you remember that all you have been is sacred and beautiful. All you are is sacred and beautiful. All you are becoming is sacred and beautiful. Be well, beloveds. Our postlude comes to us again from Leah Morris. It's You're Not Alone by Mavis Staples. And after the postlude, we invite you to leave this Zoom room and come back and join us for our virtual coffee hour in the regular Zoom space. Be well.
You're not alone. I'm with you. I'm lonely too. There's not a song that can't be sung by two. A broken home, a broken heart, isolated and afraid. Open up, this is a raid. I wanna get it through to you that you're not alone. You're not alone. Every night I stand in your place, and every tear on every face tastes the same. A broken dream, a broken heart, isolated and afraid. Open up, this is a raid. I'm gonna get it through to you that you're not alone. An open hand, an open heart. There's no need to be afraid. Open up, this is a raid. I wanna get